I'm Ivy Anderson from the California Digital Library, and in the interest of trying to make up time, we are going to try and finish at 12:30, so I will probably be racing through my remarks, for which I hope you will forgive me. One of these days, I'm going to ask for a soapbox for a podium, but so if you can see me, great, and if you can't, apologies. But I'll just proceed here. If I can. So I'm probably, in the interest of making up time, will not spend too much time on first slides of why we're supportive of change in this area. I might spend a little bit of time on why we think SCOAP3 has an innovative model that is worthy of support, but most of my remarks are very much on the ground, practical. How did we go about a decision process for the University of California? And really as information for others of you that may be confronting that same problem of how to make that decision, facilitate that decision process within a large institution. So we all know that this current system is not sustainable certainly for libraries, and it's a pretty much of a Malthusian problem of increasing research output, not enough money, our budgets are flat, research journals are eating up an increasing share of our budgets, and so for libraries, certainly it's not a sustainable situation. There are new opportunities that we think should happen in the digital realm, but there is an inertia factor. Most of the stakeholders have a vested interest. Both publishers, authors, and societies have interests in the status quo that have to be addressed in order for change to happen. So it takes some active and proactive approach to making something change, and it does take some institutional will and political will to make that happen, but we think that should be productive in the end. Why SCOAP3? SCOAP3 is a different model from some of the other open access models that we've seen in the marketplace. What we found particularly intriguing, or find particularly intriguing about SCOAP3, is that it's not disruptive to authors. We've seen that author behavior is not changing dramatically. Certainly in the U.S., the uptake of open access publishing is happening in very defined communities, but it's not happening in a very broad-based way. There was a study at the University of California that many of you may have come across recently. It was done in 2006, published in 2007, about faculty behavior and faculty attitudes with respect to scholarly communication. And the findings are findings that I think intuitively we know that there's a gap between stated values about accessibility and publishing behavior, which is rooted in the credentialing process and the need to continue the current practice for purposes of credentialing and so forth, and also because there's a barrier to change. SCOAP changes things without disrupting the author behavior. It supports the existing credentialing process, which is very important to the system as a whole, and we think that that's good for authors and also good for societies and perhaps for publishers. It does move the intervention and the action of the library from the receiving end, the subscription end at the end of the chain, to a position higher up in the information production chain, which allows us to be more instrumental in facilitating research without releasing that research and making it available for global e-science, for building of the kind of e-science infrastructure that our CERN and other colleagues have been talking about. And then finally, the notion of SCOAP3 as a funding consortium. It's a mechanism for pooling and aggregating funding from potentially a variety of sources. And we know that one of the problems in the system now is that there's been an increasing shift of costs to library budgets that used to be more distributed in the form of membership fees and author payments and so forth. And the SCOAP model allows funds to be pooled and aggregated from multiple sources. It is still a market-based approach. It's based on a tendering process, and I think there may be some questions later about that. But we think that financial model is, again, innovative and interesting. So just quickly about the University of California. I know all of you here know us well. A 10-campus system plus the California Digital Library, which is sometimes called the 11th library of the system or a co-library of the system, and in this context acts as a collaborative agent for the campuses in developing consortial and collaborative activities around scholarly communication and licensing and so forth. We have a complex decision-making process that is driven by the complexity of our institution. We have, and relevant to this process is the process that we, to this discussion is the process that we went through to vet and develop funding commitments for SCOAP3. So there are 3 different groups that are relevant here. There's a group of scholarly communication officers across the system, 1 from each campus, and that's a group that we go to validate models. Is this a good model? Is this something that we should support? Is it transformative? Is it sustainable? We have a system-wide collection development committee, again, the collection development officers across the campuses, and those folks make decisions about money. What should we spend our money on? What should we spend our collection dollars on? And then, last but not least, we have our university librarians, the directors of the campus libraries, and that is a group that we would vet a major policy initiative with to make sure that that was going to be endorsed and supported, and so that's our sort of final authorizing body. So first off, for our scholarly communication officers, we, UC System developed a document in 2005 that some of you may have come across. It's available on the web. That is a decision process that we go through that identifies criteria for investing in transformative models. And it's a document that identifies 6 or 7 different principles or different criteria by which we attempt to measure any new initiative to see, again, if it's transformative in a way that we feel we can support, if it's sustainable, how it addresses issues of financial risk for the University of California. We wrote a paper about measuring or evaluating SCOAP3 against those criteria and brought that to our scholarly communication officers group and other groups as well. Again, points I've made earlier, we felt that it's transformative because it does insulate the community from the disruptive aspects of change while facilitating change, both in terms of how publication is funded and how the credentialing process works. The funding consortium approach, moving the intervention to the peer review process rather than conceiving of publication as an endpoint service. And also the notion that by delivering final published articles to repositories and again liberating that material, it will facilitate the development of more of a global e-science infrastructure. Operational sustainability is our next criterion, and this is one where there are a lot of unknowns. So we don't quite know, we won't know this until we go forward. We know that this initiative does have operational support from CERN. That's a very strong commitment, and CERN, as we've heard, has a lot of expertise in facilitating large-scale global collaboration. There is a governance structure that will be developed. It has not been developed yet, so I think we'll all want to know more about that and possibly participate in developing that governance structure. And then much of the rest it will be to be determined. The SCOAP, the developers of SCOAP and the groups that have been working, the various working party reports and so forth, have made all of their work very open and available. I think that issues of transparency will be important, again, for the governing structure that's developed to ensure that as this initiative goes forward, it continues to be financially transparent so that it can be evaluated, and those who participate, of us who participate in it, can effectively evaluate it. We think the financial risks here are not high. There is no fee, as our colleagues have said several times this morning, until something actually goes forward. We believe that safeguards can be successfully built in with publishers, and we also will be seeking those kinds of licensed clauses in our licenses, as Max Planck has, in addition to relying on SCOAP to take that approach in its process with publishers. And we hope that SCOAP3 will be sustainable and will keep expenditures low. We hear that it will, but those again are some of the unknowns in the system, but they're risks that we think are worth taking. So how did we figure out how much money to contribute? We did very much the same thing that Max Planck folks did. We looked at what we were spending in our packages, and we have very good financial records across the UC system, so we know on day one of any given package that we subscribe to system-wide what the contribution to that package was for any given journal in the package, based on often the distribution of print subscription holdings at the time that contract was negotiated. So we took that as our starting point. We kind of rolled back the clock. What was our expenditure in year X? We also pay a cross-access fee for system-wide access in many of our contracts, and we factored that percentage in as well. We use the scope conversion factor. Is this a 100% conversion journal or 20% or 10% of the content? And so we scaled the dollar amount to that conversion factor. And then we just rolled forward year by year based on the negotiated caps in our contracts. And voila, we had an amount of money that we thought was the amount of money that we would recoup from publishers and that we could contribute to the scope initiative. So there are some packages that weren't holdings-based. They're based a little bit differently. In those cases, we took the journals as a the list price of the journals as a percentage of the total package and then used the scope conversion factor there. We brought this to our collection development committee in addition to the transformative criteria document, and again asked our collection development officers if they would approve transferring the funds to this initiative. They did. Our campus shares are already fixed for all of those packages, and so we would just move those same campus shares into the package. So figuring out what each campus would pay was not, there was no rocket science there. We already knew what those percentages were. So I very much like Rick's analogy of biological systems and the process of variation leading to adaptation. I think we agree with that as well. We're in a time in which it's important to support a lot of different models. You don't know what is going to be successful or how things will come out, and you just have to go forward with that uncertainty. So the UC system took that stand and took that position. We have gone forward, and we hope that the umbrella of scope will in fact keep the rain off. I guess we shall find out. So, thank you.